Welcome to my first Mistborn May video. This month I'm going to be making a bunch of different videos related to the Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. You can also click on the link in the description or use the coupon code Mistborn at checkout in my Etsy shop to get 15% off any order. I even have some Mistborn related things in there. The Mistborn Trilogy was the first I've read of Brandon Sanderson, and he is rapidly becoming one of my favorite authors and writing inspirations. I'm now in the middle of reading The Way of Kings, and I have to say I'm enjoying this even more than Mistborn, which is saying a lot because I love Mistborn, hence why I'm doing Mistborn May. Now I could make a whole video discussing why Brandon Sanderson is an awesome author. I might actually do that at some point, but for now let's move on to the review. Now the books I'm reviewing are The Final Empire, also simply known as Mistborn on some editions, The Well of Ascension, and The Hero of Ages. I've yet to read the secondary Wax and Wane series, which takes place 300 years in the future. So this review is going to be spoiler-free. There's going to be plenty of time to talk about spoilers in some other videos I'll post, but if you are going to make a spoiler comment, make sure to put a spoiler tag at the beginning. The story takes place in a fantasy dystopian world covered in black ash which pours out of these volcanoes, causing the sun to be red and all plant life to be brown. There's only rumors that nature used to be green and colorful. Oh, and there's also this weird mist that comes out at night. Now, a long time ago, there was this hero that was meant to save the world, but he kind of let this go to his head and he became the Lord Ruler, who's been ruling over the Final Empire for the last 1,000 years as immortal tyrant. And with the Lord Ruler being immortal and all, there's some people that think of him as a god figure, a very cruel one. Society is deeply divided. There's the noble families, the elite. These families come from the people that originally aided the Lord Ruler, and generation after generation, they still support him and gain his favor. They're able to live comfortably and host magnificent feasts and parties. And then there's the Ska, the poor souls who have to do all of the slave work for the nobles, and of course they come from the families who originally didn't support the Lord Ruler. Now some of these men and women can use allomancy, which acts as the magic system in this book, and if you've heard anything about Mistborn, I'm sure you've heard about the magic system. This system is based around ingesting metals, then burning them or absorbing the power that's in them to gain certain abilities, and there's 8 different metals that have different powers. However, most people that use allomancy can only burn one metal, and they're called mistings. There's a chart in the back of the book which lists each metal as well as their effect and the title given to the misting who can burn that metal. But there are some people who can burn all of the metals, and they're called Mistborn. But Mistborn are obviously more rare. Now, allomancy in this book it feels very realistic. It almost feels like a science. I can definitely say it's one of the best magic systems I've read. Now, allomancy is only inherited genetically through noble blood. Not all nobles can use allomancy, but Ska can't use allomancy at all. Unless a noble sleeps with a Ska woman and she manages to bear a child without getting killed. This child usually ends up growing up as a Ska without knowing they can use allomancy. Which finally leads me to the main characters and the plot. The first book follows 2 main characters, Vin, who is a young street urchin just trying to survive the streets of Luthadel, and she happens to have a mysterious amount of luck, and Kelsier, who is everyone's favorite. He's a lot of fun to read. Now this first book is often described to be like a fantasy heist novel, and Kelsier is the heist leader. He's a half Ska, half noble who can use allomancy, and his goal is to recruit a crew of allomancers in order to start a revolution and overthrow the Lord Ruler. Now, of course, he ends up recruiting Vin and training her to use allomancy. Now, that's just the description for the first book, and it might seem a bit basic, like a group of young people overthrowing the government. That's not really anything new. But this book just has so much depth to it, the whole series does, which is why I think these books need to be read as a whole. There's so many people I've seen who have read the first book and enjoyed it, but haven't felt the need to go on to the next books in the series, but let me tell you, you are missing out. The next 2 books add so much character progression. Actually, all the characters you love end up getting their own story arcs. There's also a ton of epic battles that you don't want to miss out on, which, by the way, the fight scenes in this series are so awesome. I especially love reading when a Mistborn, burns steel to push off of nearby metals. Usually they throw out a coin to push off of it and launch themselves into the air, then burn iron to pull themselves towards nearby metals. For instance, an enemy wearing armor. And it all feels very Spider-Man-like, which is so cool. Now there's also a bit of a love story. It kind of takes a back seat to all the action and stuff, but by the end of the book I do feel like it wraps up pretty well. You can just really see how careful and brilliant Sanderson planned out this series. I mean, the ending, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it was one of the best endings I've read, and it's always going to stick with me. I know I'm always going to go back and think of this ending. Now moving on to the writing style, which feels kind of like Allomancy. It's very to the point, but at the same time complex. There isn't a whole lot of beautiful prose like in the Kingkiller Chronicle where it feels very lyrical. Mistborn is more straightforward. Now this could be seen as a downside. I know I personally like really beautiful writing. This writing style still keeps you hooked. It keeps you reading, and there's a little bit of charm to it too. Like in a series where the world has no vibrant nature and there's just Kelsier's crew trying to desperately make things right again, somehow it just suits this writing style. Now let's talk about these characters. My personal favorites besides the protagonists are Spook, Tenzun, Breeze, and Sazed. Now what I love about these characters is how realistic they feel. You never really doubt their intentions, and actually you learn to trust this ragtag crew trying an impossible heist because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. These characters have dedication, and it doesn't come off as some Mary Sue or Gary Stew. They still have flaws and have struggles internal and external. Sanderson really brings these characters to life so that they feel real. And these are the characters I love to read. Now, trust is a big theme throughout this series. Vin, who grew up on the streets as a thief, obviously has a lot of trust issues, and we see her grow as a character. Actually, we see a lot of characters grow throughout this series. And as much as I have been hyping these books up, they're definitely not perfect. There is some pacing issues. I noticed it more in the second and third book. There's some parts where it just kind of slows down a bit. It never gets boring. I always feel compelled to keep reading, but at the same time it gets a little bit slower. But when you are thrown into some action, it makes it worth it, because the action scenes are like the best part of the book. I love how Brandon Sanderson incorporates allomancy into the fighting. Brandon Sanderson does a really great job at explaining the magic system. He only tells you what you need to know when you need to know it, so you don't get a huge information overload when you first read the book. Actually, I think Mistborn is probably the perfect fantasy book for people new to fantasy because the world building is done really well. I would definitely recommend this trilogy. So thank you guys for watching this video. Let me know what you thought of the Mistborn trilogy down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, I'll see you guys soon with another Mistborn May video.